Welcome. Welcome, everyone, to this week's edition of Wharton Moneyball. My favorite time of the week, where two of my favorite subjects, sports and data science, collide. This is Eric Bradlow, professor of marketing, statistics, and data science here at the Wharton School. I'm joined today by my longtime friend, collaborator, co-author, and co-host, professor of statistics and data science, Adi Wyner. Some combination of the two of us, Cade Massey and Jensen, are here every week on the Wharton Podcast Network version of Wharton Moneyball. Well, Adi, you and I have been at this for almost 12 years together, been friends for 30 years. Today's a very special week. I always say one of the greatest things we get to do here on Wharton Moneyball is we get to talk to people that are living statistics and data science and its application to sports in the real world. I would say today is no exception, but today really you and I were talking about this off the air. I would think you and I would both consider this a pinnacle of everything we've been trying to achieve with Wharton Moneyball is interviewing our guest today, Theo Epstein. For those of you that don't know, I don't know how you could not possibly know who this is, but what the hell, I'm going to read a bio anyway. And by the way, Theo, just so you know, this was generated by a large language model to show you the whole world knows this.
We'll see how accurate it is.
Yeah, we worry about that.
Yeah, we'll see. Exactly. Theo Epstein is one of the most influential baseball executives of the modern era. Best known for helping end two of the sport's longest championship droughts. After rising quickly through the Boston Red Sox front office, he became MLB's youngest general manager and helped build the roster that won the 2004 World Series for the Red Sox, the franchise's first title in 86 years, and later another championship in 2007. He then took over baseball operations for the Chicago Cubs and helped the organization to a historic 2016 World Series victory, ending a 108-year title drought. Widely respected for blending scouting, player development, and analytics, Epstein has also been a prominent voice on the future of the game, including pace of play and competitive balance. So Theo, please, on behalf of Adi and myself and all of our listeners, welcome to Wharton Moneyball.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I'm not sure I'm the pinnacle of anything, but I appreciate that kind of intro.
Now, I should warn you, by the way, I don't know if you've ever listened to our show. You broke our hearts because just so I'll listen.
Yeah, he's going to get it out there right early.
I might as well let you know there's no two more diehard Yankee fans than Eric Bradlow and Adi Wyner. But withstanding that, we do have respect for everything that went on in 2004, 2007, 2016, and beyond.
Yeah, I'm breaking my rule of being outnumbered by Yankee fans.
Yeah.
I'll roll with it.
Well, Adi, let me turn things over to you, please.
Sure. Okay. So, I thought it was a pretty accurate bio. But in the process of doing a little bit of research, I remember that when you first started at the Red Sox, Billy Beane was in hot pursuit by the Red Sox, and he obviously turned them down to stay at the Oakland A's. And at least the story is that he actually recommended they just hire you. So you can confirm or deny that. That's up to you. But I wanted to ask you specifically, how influenced were you by what Beane was doing at Oakland A's? And just to be more specific, what we would call SABR, meaning sports analytics oriented or baseball analytics, were the Red Sox back in the day when you first took over? Because it's a different time now than it was then.
Yeah. Well, first off, it's true that Billy recommended me, but not before I recommended him. So I was actually running the search process for the GM. I was the assistant GM. I'd been there a year. My boss, the interim general manager, Mike Port, had been let go at the end of or removed from that role at the end of the 2002 season. So we had a search process that I led, and Billy was the top guy, the guy that we all wanted. And it was sort of a long, very public pursuit. And he ended up accepting the job, got a record contract. And then, the Moneyball, the movie, sort of has it a little bit right. And there's more to it. But he called me 24 hours after taking the job and asked if I was sitting down. And then after I sat down, he told me that he had decided he couldn't take the job. And so I had to go back with my tail between my legs to John Henry and Tom Werner and Larry Lucchino and told them we had to start the process over again. They met, and a day or two later, they called me in and said, well, we just want you to do it. That's what Billy said we should do. And we've gotten to know you over the last year, and we think you're the right person for the job. So as to how influenced I was by Billy and what Oakland was doing, and definitely absolutely took note of it. I mean, they were doing remarkable things on a small budget. I think it's probably accurate to say both Billy and I and Billy's mentor, Sandy Alderson, were all sort of influenced by Bill James and by the school of sabermetric thought that had always existed sort of outside the walls at MLB up to that point. I grew up in the 80s watching baseball, playing baseball, but then also reading Bill James baseball abstracts. And I know Sandy, he's talked about this. So when he got the job, he saw it as an opportunity to apply a lot of Bill's concepts. And frankly, a lot of that dates back to like George Weiss and the Yankees. He had his own personal statistician, and he made a lot of decisions based on the hidden value of numbers in baseball. Branch Rickey the same way, and a lot of it dates way back. But Bill's masterful mind sort of just made it crystal clear that there's this whole other world, other way to evaluate players, other way to understand the game. Sandy, I think, understood that, weaponized it. Billy took it to another level. And then when I took over the Red Sox, it was at a time, it was before Moneyball had come out. There were only a handful of teams really using statistical analysis in a meaningful way to make decisions. And so that made it, that left a lot of low-hanging fruit. And then my personal philosophy, having come up with the Padres under Kevin Towers, I had the benefit of, my cubicle was literally situated between the scouting director, Brad Sloan, and the statistical director, Adi Epstein, no relation. And those two had completely opposite views of the world. Brad Sloan didn't want to know a player's stats. He just wanted us to evaluate them by watching them play. He thought it would bias his opinion or his scout's opinion if he knew what the player's performance was. And Eddie was the opposite. He didn't want to see him play. He just wanted to take a sophisticated look at the player's track record, run it through his models, and make a projection. So those two guys had opposed views of the world, but I ended up soaking up a lot from both of them and sort of came to the conclusion that the right answer is not just looking through the traditional scouting lens and not just looking through the objective analysis lens, but whenever possible, using both to try to get to the clearest picture of the player. And so watching what Billy was doing successfully in Oakland and taking over in Boston, knowing that we had a lot more resources than they did. And I had this personal approach trying to blend analytics and scouting. I just saw it as sort of a great opportunity to learn from a lot of great people and go off and try to apply it the best we could with a new approach.
Just to jump in here, and then I know Adi's going to continue on with some other questions. A couple things. One is I'm a strong believer, like you are, Theo. Apparently, in statistics we might call that an ensemble estimator. We get a scouting approach, we get a more analytics approach. Every theorem of statistics says you get optimal solutions when you blend both. Neither is 100% correct, and you do better. The second thing, you'll be proud of this. Last week, our guest was Josh Rawitz, the president of the National Baseball Hall of Fame. We, of course, recommended you for the Hall of Fame. We hope that, seriously, we hope it happens someday. And the other person we talked about was Bill James. And we said, but unfortunately for Bill, there isn't like the same path there is for you as an executive. And we just told Josh, we did this on the air. We just said, something has to be fixed. Like how Theo Epstein's not in the Hall of Fame and how Bill James is not in the Hall of Fame. Like to us, there is no Hall of Fame. And he gave a very good answer. He said, well, I don't know if there'll be a day where a plaque of Bill James will be in the Hall of Fame, but Bill James is in the Hall of Fame. It's the Hall of Fame and Museum. You can't talk about the history of baseball without talking about Bill James. And I thought that was a very thoughtful answer. But I just want to know, it's on the record. We want you both in the Hall of Fame.
Appreciate the support there. But yeah, Bill's had a transformational impact on the game and on a lot of others who went on to make their own impact as well.
So that actually leads me to my second question, because Bill James, obviously his role is incredible, but as you pointed out, a lot of these ideas, particularly the ones that most people will talk about, the value of the OBP, the home run, and the poverty of the batting average as a metric, shifts and things like this, these were known for a long time. And in fact, when I teach students at all levels, I emphasize that Moneyball, the book and the movie especially, is actually it's people think it's a baseball book. It sort of is. People often think it's a statistics book. It sort of is that, but it's really a management book. It's really about getting an organization that didn't value certain things to change and become and value them. And we know, like, and we always ask the question, how did it take basketball so long to figure out that 3 is bigger than 2? It's just, how do you miss that? And the answer is actually complicated. And so I guess my question for you is, how did you transition a team from doing things historically into what, I mean, everybody does now to its varying degrees, understands completely that you have to use the numbers the way they are done now? How did that transition actually, how did that take place?
Well, we had the benefit of having an owner in John Henry who really set the tone for that. I mean,
Right.
my first meeting with John after I got the job, he said, "Oh, we need to arm you, with some experienced advisors because you're young, and it'll help you. It'll also make it look better." And so Bill LaJoy, who was a great general manager, we brought in, put the '84 Tigers together, and then John suggested Bill James, and I said, "Great, so let's call him." I'll never forget sitting in John Henry's office. We just cold called Bill James, and Bill's answer, he goes, "I have a rule I try to live by, which is never say no to it. If a billionaire wants to meet with you, never say no." So he agreed to fly to Boston, and we ended up hiring him as an advisor. But so we had great alignment throughout the organization because John set the tone. He had made his fortune in the markets using models and algorithms and understanding trends and trend following in the markets. And so he was a Bill James reader. He was very driven by data. And so I guess the way I approached it initially was to make it clear that we were going to take some risks, that the Red Sox had at the time, 84 years or so of not having success, and we were going to try things a different way, that we weren't afraid to be wrong. But that just because we were going to build an infrastructure that allowed us to work successfully with data didn't mean that we didn't place tremendous value on scouting. It didn't mean that we didn't place tremendous value on player development, and that there was room for everything. We tried to be transparent and open with the organization. That you'll remember back then at the time, there was a lot of animosity, really, from the old guard to the new guard.
Yeah.
Scouts
Yep.
thinking computers were going to come and take their jobs, and so we just tried to cross-pollinate as best we could, share information. We'd send our analysts out on the road with the scouts to get them to understand how hard their job was and to understand what they bring to the table and share ideas. We'd bring our scouts into the draft room and in preparation for the draft and show them the models that we were going to use. And we had some early wins that helped create some momentum behind some of the ideas we were using. And you tried to just create a culture of thoroughness, using all the information possible, creativity, trying to innovate, that there were sort of no bad ideas. And, when you're trying to find a competitive advantage in baseball, you do a lot of R&D. 99 projects can lead nowhere, and the 100th one might help you gain a little bit of insight, something actionable, help you position the fielder a little bit better, help you evaluate a player in the draft a little bit better, and just tried to foster that culture where there are no bad ideas, and that it was, but good ideas would be rewarded and brought down to the clubhouse or show up on the GM's desk. So it was, sort of a culture change project as much as anything else.
I'm really loving this format, Adi, where you ask questions, Theo answers. Now I get to chirp in here. So let me just chirp in. One is, Theo, you said something that makes me think of today, which is, people were worried back then that computers were going to take their jobs. Wow, if we just replace that with the word AI, we're in 2026. And so that's one thing. The second is, our listeners on Wharton Moneyball knows this. I started the data science team at the Philadelphia Eagles, our home football team. Jeffrey Lurie has a PhD in sociology. He's a quant guy. He contacted me, and it starts from the top. When, it was him and Howie Roseman that I reported to. Howie's a very quant-oriented guy. That was, I hate to say it, but the rest of the organization fell in line when the owner says we will be data oriented, and we'll use it as you didn't use these exact words, but it's what you meant. It's a decision support tool. No one's looking to automate draft decisions to Eric Bradlow's statistical model, but it's another input into the decision making. So I really, everything you said really resonated a lot with me.
And it was a time when there was so much low hanging fruit that we would have been negligent in
not picking them up.
I'll give you an example. I'd been in the draft room with the Padres in the mid 90s and late 90s, and there were no stats in the room whatsoever. And I remember one year we had these extra picks, and I was up high, and the night before the draft, I was in a panic because I could tell from the way we were setting up our board and the way we were talking about certain players that we were going to end up with a handful of players who had subpar performance at small colleges, and we were going to draft them just based on some scouting looks and expect them to go out and perform their way through the minor leagues and perform in the big league against better competition. So in a panic, I remember calling the night before the draft, calling sports information directors at the respective colleges and asking them to fax me their team stat sheet, so I'd at least have the ability to stand up on a soapbox and say, why are we about to draft a kid from Texas Pan American with a 5.5 ERA, at the bottom of the first round. And we did, and he didn't get that A ball. But so when I got to the Red Sox, literally the first project we did, we sent a team of interns to NCAA headquarters, and had them look through file cabinets and photocopied 30 years worth of college baseball stats, just trying to answer the simple question, what do great big leaguers look like when they're in college? And so just, simple process, building a database, run some regression analyses, came up with a very simple set of formulas. One was ISO power over strikeouts, ISO P over K. And it just basically showed that if you slug, doesn't have to be homers, but if you have enough isolated power, if you slug in college ball and you make a lot of contact and don't strike out, you tend to project really well. So we took that into the draft in 2004, and Dustin Pedroia was, not a prototypical high pick because he didn't hit for a ton of power, although he hit a lot of doubles and some triples. He only had a handful of homers, but he never struck out. And so he did extremely well in the ISO P over K. We moved him up to the point where he became our first pick. And, both good scouting reports, great makeup, but also, we moved him where we needed to because he lit up this metric that we had just devised. And then, obviously the rest is history, rookie of the year. MVP.
Yeah, we know all about it.
Yeah, we don't want to.
So it's just an example of, there was so much low hanging fruit. You go from 1 year, you're with an organization, you're not using any stats in the draft and they're not allowed, to a couple of years later, now you have some formulas where you think you can identify what good big leaguers look like in college. You can weaponize that. And we ended up being the best drafting team of the decade, mainly through great scouts and great process, but also because we were one of the first teams to really incorporate that kind of data and that kind of innovation into the draft room.
So I think it's fair to say that I want to scroll us in time to today, to 2026. Teams all over are using these. These are now fan graphs. It's you get all this information. So I don't even want to entertain that, but let's ask a question. I'll start with an example. One of the most recent papers I wrote in baseball. Surprisingly, I write more papers now. Baseball is still my favorite sport, in football and other things, because there's so much widespread interest and some level more to do. But I did write a paper on something which every time you watch a baseball game and it's late in the game, the announcers keep yapping away about what they call the third time through the order effect. So if you actually see how it's implemented in the game, the way they implement it is what we would call statistically based on the idea of a discontinuity. So that the pitcher, once the lineup turns over, you're now dealing with batters who have seen the pitcher twice, and they have now an advantage. That's a discontinuity. So, and therefore you should react accordingly. The pitcher is going to be more likely to be hit. So what I did was look at the data. I did this with my former PhD student, Ryan Brill, and we discovered that while it's very obvious that the pitcher starts to break down in the third time through the order, it's not because of a discontinuity. it's because of a combination of getting exhausted and that everyone's watching the pitcher. So at some level, it is batter learning. They are watching the pitcher, but it's not a discontinuity. And the reason why that's distinction is because there's no real reason to pull the pitcher just because they're heading into the third time through the order if they're having a good game, and that it's not a discontinuity. So I take that as something that is a widespread practice that I believe as an academic is wrong. So my question to you is, what are the analytics that are either being used too much and maybe ineffectively? And is there another analytics thing or an avenue, an area of baseball where analytics isn't being applied enough? So where is it over the top and where is it not being underused? And this is in today's game. Do you have anything you could think
where
about?
is it being used too much?
So my example was the third time through there. You're trying to do it too much with the relievers and not looking almost in the old fashioned way. How is that pitcher doing on that day?
Well, I think it's a process, right? Where we're like, when you can first quantify something, it becomes over relied upon. So,
right.
I think people have always known, you have to be careful with pitchers as they get later in games. And then it was, oh, wow, look what happens third time through the order. Oh, we can quantify it. Here's a third time through the order penalty. Let's make sure we don't fall victim to that. And then, overreact and start pulling pitchers too early. I think then there's more sophisticated thought. We're like, oh, let's separate fatigue from the exposure element. We can, and then you have to take into account, what the alternative is. Just because you may not be as effective the third time through the order, you have to then look at, what are my probabilities of getting outs, with the alternatives. And so I think most teams by this point have now gotten to a point where they'll have their manager prepared with a card that shows sort of the appropriate third time through the order penalty, but then also what the matchup is for a fresh each available reliever facing for the first time, and he can make a comparison so that if you look at the information in context and better understand it vis-a-vis the alternatives, you're more likely to make a decision than just overreacting to some sort of newly discovered phenomenon. I feel like a lot of baseball new data streams or new insights fall into that pattern. Like when we first started to be able to quantify defense, there were a lot of overreactions and sort of like misattribution of skill in certain ways. We had some data, but it wasn't perfect data, and it wasn't taking all the factors into consideration. But back to your original question, which is where is it being underutilized? Where is it being where's it being underutilized? Where is it being overutilized? I don't know. I think I'm going to think about that. I think personally, I think there's sort of too much data being used in in-game decision making, right? Where
that was my
where like the manager, he needs some basic information, which he probably understands because managers prepare really well for games to begin with. But there is something to the flow of a game, to understanding your personnel, to being in the dugout. To feel is a real thing. Just because it's not like quantifiable and driven by numbers, managers have a pretty good understanding of how to run a game. And I think you lose a little bit of that when there's too heavy a hand, too much information being forced upon on the manager. I wouldn't want a manager who's underprepared, who doesn't understand the percentages. But at the same time, I wouldn't want to put a manager in a position where he doesn't have the ability to take in all the factors, including those that are harder to quantify and make decisions. Where there's probably not enough data in the game and where there's a race to incorporate data is like injury prevention, right? We're just, that's like the next big breakthrough. It's already started in player development using obviously data and tech to improve player development and to sort of engineer training for certain outcomes that are really important.
Let's hope AI and motion data also helps with that video analysis now that can be done at large scale with motion data as well.
Absolutely. And what all that will do is increase the data set and give you enough information where then now your analyst or AI or a combination thereof can go about analyzing a big enough data set where we will hopefully find some leading indicators
Exactly.
injury that we can sort of develop and around and put players in a better position to stay healthy. It's $1 billion question.
It's
The only
also
thing-
an arms race because
right.
they get very advanced training methods, which is giving you more ability to train harder and longer. But now you get more injury and you get methods to prevent that. And so it's almost like it's still, I don't think the injury rates have they gone up? They've gone down? Where are they? They constant? I mean,
yeah, they're really constant. And
yeah.
what's amazing, and Bill James used to make this point too. And this gets to your point about third time through the order and fatigue, but the pitch limits and pitch counts and innings limits. We've changed pitcher usage so dramatically over the year. It really started with remember when Billy Martin had the 4 aces in Oakland, and they were on the cover of Sports Illustrated, and everyone thought they have this dominant pitching staff that's young. They're going to be together forever. And then all 4 of those guys got hurt and blew out in the course of a year. And what happened? Billy Martin lost his job. Because that, and Bill's theory is that because if you look at the data, that's when the most dramatic change in pitcher usage occurred, where we started going from 275 innings to 250, 225, 200. Now 180, 170. Pitchers used to throw upwards of 200 pitches a game, and then there was a huge drop off. Obviously, now we're like below 100, but that was sort of this inflection point. And Bill's theory is that the managers notice that if you blow out your very talented, very valuable pitchers, you're more likely to lose your job. So usage changed dramatically. But look how far we are from where pitchers were a couple of generations ago, throwing so much less. It's such less lowered volume, and injury rates are exactly the same. And so the main reason for that is because obviously when you throw less, you throw with more max effort.
Yeah.
And so the entire modern pitch.
We've had lots of biomechanics people on our show that have talked to us about what really matters in their view, love your view on this, is not so much the number of pitches, but how many max effort pitches.
Yeah, exactly. And so people ask all the time, well, A, how do you keep pitchers healthier? And then B is also sort of how do you rein pitching in a little bit so that the strikeout rate gets back under control, balls are in play a little bit more, pitchers can go deeper in games, restore the value of the starting pitcher. And I think, it's obviously not a new concept, but this idea of if you could get to a point where you have real limits on the number of pitchers on a pitching staff. When I was growing up, there were 10 pitchers on a staff. Then it went to 11 and 12 and 13 and 14 and 15. We've obviously reined it back in with the 13 pitcher limit. But if you could ever gradually work it down, so say, hey, we're going to move that limit to 12 pitchers 2 years from now. So train your pitchers accordingly. And then if we don't get the strikeout rate under control, but if we don't hit a certain metric, 2 years after that, we're going to 11 pitchers. And if we don't get the strikeout rate under 22%, or by then we're going to go to 10 pitchers. You would just have to draft and develop pitchers differently and bring back the art of pitching. And the percentage of pitches thrown at max effort would go down because the job of the starting pitcher used to be go as deep in the game as you possibly can, if not pitch the whole thing. And so pitchers would modulate their effort. They'd come out throwing 90 miles an hour. And if they really needed it in a big spot, they'd reach back and throw a max effort fastball and get more. But now the whole job description has changed because of optimization. We understand how hard it is to hit maximum stuff thrown with max effort. And so now the job description of the pitcher is get me as many outs as you can, but miss as many bats as you can along the way. And don't worry if you have to come out after 4 2/3, because I've got 8 guys who are throwing 99 miles an hour.
Theo, just so you know, one of Adi and my favorite moments on our show was when we interviewed John Smoltz, and we asked him, who wouldn't even make the major leagues? And he said, there's no way Greg Maddux would make the major leagues today with the stuff he had. Like, who would have seen that a guy, who can barely throw 90, that hits all his spots, would win whatever 300?
Well, that's actually not true. That's actually not true, because when Greg Maddux was drafted out of high school and his early years in the minor leagues, he threw quite hard. He was throwing 95 miles an hour. But what Maddux learned is that he could be just as effective toning it back, hitting his spots, and using movement and changing speeds to be effective. I think if Greg Maddux were drafted today, they would have said, hey, you throw 95.
Now throw 98.
Let's put you on a velocity program to
Right.
make sure you throw 98, and he would have thrown a fraction of the amount of innings and probably never would have developed.
So that actually leads me to my next kind of question and topic is you were really influential in changing a bunch of the rules that were really, I think it had a tremendously positive impact on MLB. The pitch clock, the bases, the pickoff limitation, and the size of the bases. I guess I want to confirm that this was, you were studying this with the MLB, and I love the changes. I want you to comment that, but particularly the time between pitches. What has that done to the pitcher? Does that force them to not throw as hard because they don't have a 45 seconds to a minute to catch their breath and rear back another 100-mile-an-hour fastball? Or is it just making their time through the game shorter? What's the impact of that? And how do you reflect on that change in particular? You're proud of it? I mean, I love it.
Yeah, no, it's true. I had been when I was serving as general manager, I had been on the competition committee for, over a decade. And so I had given those issues a lot of thought, and frankly, it was kind of frustrating because we couldn't get much done on the competition committees. And so when I was reaching the end of my time with the Cubs, I reached out to Commissioner Manfred and asked if I could have a role at Major League Baseball, just helping out with the rule change projects. And he was great and brought me in. So with Morgan Sword and his staff at baseball operations at Central Baseball, I was allowed to be one of the leaders of those projects. And it was a lot of fun. There were a lot of different components to it. There was a sort of like research component. We relied on a lot of club analysts and a lot of very smart people to try to model all the changes. There was a sort of scientific method experimentation process where we were able to, we had this great petri dish of the minor leagues where we could experiment a little bit, make sure we sort of planned and determined any unintended consequences and sort of understood what worked about the proposed changes, what didn't, in not just in theory, but in practice. And we were able to test over the course of 8,000 minor league games so that by the time we were ready to implement at the major league level, we were really confident. We understood that the rules worked, what the outcome would be, and that they were fair to players. And then there was a sort of like political campaign element of the rule change process too, where we were trying to win hearts and minds and, sort of placate traditionalists as well as sort of younger fans and get the players and the managers and the media on board. And then the execution element where, you had to make sure the adjustment period was as small as possible. And that went pretty well. I think pretty much by like the end of April, that first year, people just didn't notice the pitch timer, and all they noticed was this really crisp, beautiful pace to the game, and that they were getting home at a more reasonable hour. But as far as the pitch timer's impact on pitchers, I mean, the pitch timer was going to have a lot of effects. Ultimately, I think like on pitchers, on hitters, on the pace of play, on fans, and ultimately they were like all going to be really positive, right? With pitchers, one of the secondary impacts on pitchers was going to be that this trend of pitchers taking a lot of extra time between pitches in order to be able to recover and throw max effort was going to be mitigated a little bit. So I think pitchers figured out, and a lot of people at the clubs figured out that, to throw more pitches at max effort, you could accomplish that by pacing yourself. And conversely, if you have to work at a more rapid pace, you have to modulate a little bit. Now, the strikeout rate didn't go down directly because of that, because it's a multifactorial issue and a complicated equation. But I think it helps a little bit. And then obviously you have to balance that with the concern that recovery is a good thing, and that if you ask pitchers to do too much, you could potentially run the risk of hurting them. But I think the data has backed up that what we saw in the minor leagues, I think what's held true in the major leagues, is that the pitch timer is not a contributing factor to the increased injury rate. It's simply the desire to throw max effort as frequently as possible that's really leading to these injuries.
I think they probably have to pull it back just because they just don't have the energy. But I'm
Yeah.
surprised that the strikeout rate didn't go down, and that probably was in. It didn't go up though, did it either? Or
Yeah, it
just
went down. It stabilized a little.
yeah,
It stabilized a little bit.
because we don't have the counterfactual. I would imagine it would have gone. It would have gone up a little bit and probably kept it from rising. It just sort of
Yeah.
stopped that
Yeah.
trend.
Again,
Which
I
is
think it's just going to be there are sort of other interventions that ultimately will be necessary to lower the strikeout rate. And we tested all kinds of things. We even tested mound distance, where
uh,
in one of the independent
yeah,
leagues,
we heard about
we
that.
ran this joint venture where we moved it back from 60 feet 6 inches by, I think it was a foot. And again, it's sort of like a dynamic environment. So that alone doesn't lower the strikeout rate, because then breaking balls actually break a little bit more from that distance. And there's a huge adjustment period for hitters to who have trained their whole lives seeing pitches at 60 feet 6 inches. How long do they have to be exposed to this new input before they can adjust as well? So I still think there's something there to toy with, but a lot of different things a lot of different levers you can pull to try to get the strikeout rate back under control. I think ultimately the most important thing is we have to ask a little bit more from our pitchers in terms of volume,
Yeah,
whether through its pitcher roster limits or through like mandating a length of starts, be certain innings, unless you have to go.
you
You have to
lose
go
your
5
DH or something.
innings if
Yeah.
or you can't come out of a game unless you've gone 5 innings or give up 5 runs or unless there's an injury concern. But just change the job description for more volume so that pitching is not about power and missing bats exclusively. It's also an art where you need to be efficient, so that there's a reason to throw under certain game situations, throw a 1-1 sinker down the middle, knowing that
There's only, as the famous quote, I think it was Sandy Koufax said, right? I became a good pitcher when I stopped trying to make guys miss the ball.
Yeah, and under the current environment, teams are asking pitchers, "Hey, if you want to be a good pitcher, miss as many bats as you can."
Right.
And because that's an optimization under the current system. So putting in constraints that change the equation, change the incentives, soon you'll start rewarding pitchers that can go deep in games and that throw volume, even at reduced strikeout rates. But under the current system, teams would be crazy to pay for anything other than bat missing, because that's the one
That's
way
right.
to know you're going to get guys out.
So I want to ask about the I guess the fan experience, which is one of the things that the pitch clock really helped. It moved the game along. And I'm a traditionalist, and my view is you brought it back to where it was.
Yeah,
The
exactly.
game's pace was back to where it was.
Right.
And why I would be very against changing the distance, because one of the beautiful things about baseball is you can say
Yeah.
Sandy Koufax was playing the same game as they're playing today, and they
Yeah.
really are. So I'll add two things. I actually went to a Phillies game this past season, and there weren't any strikeouts. And there was lots of ground balls, lots of terrific fielding. And one of the things that's great about a game in person is you really feel what a spectacular fielding play. You don't catch that on TV. That's missing, but you really feel that in person. There were stolen bases. So I'll just an anecdote. Back in the day, stealing bases was considered something you needed to do. And one of the things the analysts showed that if you're not doing that on average 2/3 of the time, although there's some variance in that, depending on context, you're not getting any value out of that. And even so, Babe Ruth used to steal tons of bases when he was young, and he was actually somewhat quick, but he was not successful at it very much.
Yeah.
Half the time. He was actually costing his team a lot of value. We know that now. But from a fan experience, all those balls in play, all that action makes the game fun to watch.
Yeah.
And so the new rules about stolen bases have made the game more exciting. I think you would concur. So my question is two things. How do we get as you know, and Eric, and you were all roughly the same age. You're a little younger than we are, but not too much. Baseball was once the national game, and football has overtaken. And I think that's largely to do with the TV, the beauty and elegance it has on television. But what we have is, I say we, it's not we, baseball has the advantage of having a great experience in the ballpark and 162 games. And I think all of us, I know Eric and we got to be baseball fans from our childhood, from the experience of going to games. And maybe you did in something similar, or playing. How do we get baseball to bring back fans and be attracted to it? How do we make the fan experience better? Is that something that you're thinking about? I know that Some people are trying to get engagement that really connects with fans through computers, through their phones, through like forecasting. But how do you think about the fan experience? And you can think about stolen bases as an example, and maybe jumping off from that.
Yeah. So the entire rule change project that led to the pitch timer, bigger bases, and the shift changes was intended to give fans more of what they like and less of what they don't like. And the reason I love that project is, I'd worked 29 years for teams where you're really only focused on winning. Right. So I'm a huge baseball fan, but you have to almost stop thinking like a fan in order to be a GM, and your currency is wins. And so you're trying to optimize your player selection, your player deployment, your player development, just simply to win. So, for instance, if you know that the stolen base attempt is only a good play if you're going to be successful 70% of the time, then you ask your base runners not to go unless everything adds up, all the math adds up that they're going to be successful more than 70% of the time, even though it's a very entertaining game. So we started that project with a ton of fan outreach, trying to determine what is it that fans really like about baseball, what is it that they don't like. We were trying to create the most joyful, most entertaining version of baseball, figuring that if you do that, that's the single best thing you can do to bring fans back. Turns out you're right. Fans like action. They like the ball in play. They like athleticism on display. Their favorite 3 events at a baseball game are triples, doubles, and stolen bases. Their least favorite events are anything that has to do with inaction or inactivity. So they don't like pitching changes. They don't like intentional walks. They don't like things where there's any dead time whatsoever. So we knew we wanted to try to incorporate some rules that would change the math on stolen bases to make it a little bit better percentage play, so that there'd be more attempts and more stolen bases and more athleticism on display on the bases. So, you mentioned being a traditionalist as well, and you never want to change 60 feet, 6 inches. Well, the same is sort of true of the base paths. They've been set out 90 feet.
3 inches shorter now.
Well, no, but it's not. This is what's interesting. I'll tell you this anecdote. It's not 90 feet between bases. It's a 90 foot square at which the bases are set out, with first base is on one end of that square. Second base is the midpoint of the base on the 90 degree corner. Second base, third base is within there. So it's actually, it's always been less than 90 feet between bases.
Right.
And so we were sitting around, we said, well, one way we can encourage stolen base activity is to shorten the distance between bases. But we could never get away with that because everyone thinks it's 90 feet between bases. And it was actually an analyst at the Cubs, Chris Jones, who we were having a meeting about this, and he came up and he just said, bigger bases. I said, what do you mean bigger bases? And he said, well, that's another way to shorten the distance between bases without having to change the geometry of the game. So fast forward a year later, I'm leading this project at MLB, and I'm on a Zoom with all 30 major league managers. And I asked them, okay, how wide is home plate? And they all knew 17 inches. And I said, well, what's the distance between home plate and the pitcher's mound? And they all knew 60 feet, 6 inches. And I said, well, let me ask you this. What are the dimensions of a major league base?
No idea.
Guess how many of the 30 knew?
None.
Correct. 0.
Beautiful.
I don't know.
No one knew that it was.
I don't know, and I'm a numbers guy.
So it was 15 inches by 15 inches, right? 15 inches squared. And so I said, well, look, if you guys don't even know how big a base is, then I don't want to hear that we're ruining the game by adding 3 inches on the base. And so when you add 3, you make the base 18 inches by 18 inches, which is what we did. Now all of a sudden the distance between first base and second base is shorter by 4.5 inches. Because you gain 3 feet at first base and you gain 1.5 inches at second base. So 4.5 inches is like the length of your finger. So all those bang bang plays where you're just out at second base by less than, now all of a sudden you're safe. And so the stolen base became a better percentage play by shortening the distance between bases, doing it in a way that didn't offend the traditionalists, because you weren't messing with 90 feet. You were just messing with the size of the base, which not even the major league managers knew about. And it ended up being a very successful rule change because the math worked. We tested it in the minor leagues. Once you shorten the distance, more stolen base attempts, higher success rate. And that's exactly what happened in the major leagues. And so, we had gotten down to a point where guys were leading the big leagues in stolen bases with like 40 bags. And we just realized it's a better game when guys can steal 70, 80 bags. And so now there's a lot more guys running, a lot more guys getting, 30 bags, and it's a better
But also
game
the
now.
pickoffs, right? How would you distribute the increase to the pickoff, the limitation versus the?
Yeah, I think that was definitely part of it. As part of the pitch timer rule, you had to put in the pickoff throw limitation. It's really a disengagement. It's really a limit on how many times you can disengage from the rubber as a pitcher. The data shows that that's not as significant as you would think, but certainly helps and certainly moves the needle the right direction. Everyone was saying, oh, once you've disengaged once, you only have one left, or once you've disengaged twice and you have to put the runner out, or else it's an automatic 90, it's going to be an automatic bag. And that fear did not play out. If you look right behind the data, it hasn't ruined the game. You don't hear too many people talk about it. Now it's just another part of the pitcher runner dynamic.
So,
Is
Theo,
that something? Go ahead.
Let me ask you a few last questions for us here.
Yeah.
First, without giving out any secret sauce about what you're specifically working on now, which I'll ask you in a second, how do all the teams, whether it's our Yankees, your Red Sox, whether formerly the Cubs, how do we compete with the Dodgers today? Like, if, one way to think about it is we need to go in an entirely different direction. Like, they're good on these dimensions, and so we can't compete. We can't be better than them on the dimensions in which they're really strong. Another option would be, we have to invest in, I don't know, purely, we're going to be the best defensive team, and so we'll try to create as many outs that way. How do you think about competing with a team that's now the two-time champion? And, I think
Top team spender.
Yeah, they've gotten better. They're the biggest spender. Like, how do teams even think about compete? Like, for example, you've been a general manager long enough. You remember when our Yankees were the 3-time repeat champions and were an out or two away from 4-time repeat champions in 2001. How did you think about it then, and how do you think about it now?
Yeah. Look, I think obviously the Dodgers have tremendous resources and have done a remarkable job of using them and growing them and creating this cycle where they've had so much success that their revenues have grown. They're up over like $1 billion in revenue, I think, now, and it's just this perpetuating cycle. They've done a phenomenal job. But look, it's baseball. So Billy famously said the playoffs are a crapshoot, and I don't fully agree with that. It's not a crapshoot, but there's no team that's actually can get anywhere close to a 50% chance of winning the World Series. So the Dodgers are still underdogs compared to the field. And so the answer is you try to build a team that has sustained success and gets into the playoffs as often as possible, and then lean into the ingredients that make for a successful October baseball team. And chance plays a huge part in what happens in October. The Dodgers themselves were an inch away from not being champions last year, and then they became. But there are certain elements of the game and elements of the roster that take on added emphasis in October. So our goal when I was with the Red Sox was always, build a team that wins, a foolproof team to win 95 games a year. Anything that could get in the way of us winning 95 games a year, we needed to attack and create redundancies and depth, because you couldn't look up and say injuries are an excuse or this is an excuse. So win 95 and get in, and then make sure your roster is built for October as well. And that worked. Then with the Cubs, different landscape. Now there's wild card teams, lowers the bar a little bit, 93.
You don't need 95. Now you probably need 90.
Doesn't need to be 95 anymore. But, now that bar has never been lower. Say you could either be a fan or a critic of the modern playoff structure, but the reality is the bar has never been lower to get into the postseason. And so if I were with a team and said, how am I going to compete with the Dodgers? I would start with build a team that's get into the playoffs every single year, and then lean into the elements that make a team successful in October, be prepared and attack it that way.
So maybe two more questions. I lied.
I got to do a follow-up, though. Just jump in.
Go ahead. You go ahead. Your
What is
follow-up.
that? So we love to argue about what that actual element is. Some people have said it's starting pitching. Others said it would be middle relief pitching. Others said it's contact. Is it homers? If you had to pick one thing that's that ingredient for October that's different from the 95 games in the regular season, what would it be?
Well, one of my roles now is with Fenway Sports Group, which owns the Red Sox, and I'm an advisor there. So I'm not going to share.
You're not going to share.
I can talk about an element that's kind of obvious and has been publicly discussed. So it's not sharing anything. But you're having like an ace reliever or two or three just absolute shutdown relievers has added import in October because they're pitching a much greater percentage of the innings and where the sort of most important innings where the game turns in October. So, that's why we traded for Aroldis Chapman. One of the reasons we traded for Aroldis Chapman with the Cubs is we were not, doing that to maximize our chances of winning the division. And we were pretty sure we were going to the division. Our calculation was literally based on World Series odds.
Right.
And a pitcher like that can change your World Series odds. I think adding him changed our World Series odds from something like World Series championship odds from something like 18% to 22%.
I would have guessed 3 to 5%, which is huge.
Right. And so
and then you got him back.
That kind of end back with one player. It's that and you know what? We don't win Game 5 of the World Series at Wrigley Field without him. He comes in and 1 out in the 7th, and that gets 8 huge outs in a 1-run game. So that one turned out well. But so ace reliever, and then it's obvious like you need good 4th, 5th starters, 6th, 7th, 8th starters to get through a season and win enough games to get in the postseason. But your 4th and 5th starters probably don't see the light of day, in the postseason. And your ace pitches, out of the 1,400 innings these days, he might be lucky to pitch 200 in the regular season. So 1/7, 13, 14%, whatever that is. But in the postseason, especially if he can start games 1, 4, and 7, he's pitching a much higher percent. So like your top 2 or 3 starters, your top 1 or 2 relievers, obviously those are more important positions in the postseason even than in the regular season.
Can you just last question? You mentioned about the work you're doing now with the Fenway Sports Group. What is your actual role and title today? And, are we going to see you back in a general manager? Are you interested in a full-time general manager role again? Or, I don't know, if the baseball, Josh Rawitz told the story where, the Baseball Hall of Fame called him and he took over the job. Is there some dream job you'd like to have? Like, I don't know, would Rob Manfred called you tomorrow and said, Theo Epstein, the owners of that, we need you to take over Major League Baseball. No, it's not it's not, you're laughing, but none of us would, there's no baseball fan that would have a problem with that at all. So what are you doing now for the Fenway Sports Group? And what do you see? To me, you look like an extremely young man. What do you forecast for the next 30 years of your career in baseball?
Well, I appreciate that compliment. I am 52, so it's all age is all relative. But I have 2 part-time jobs now, and also have the benefit that, after those 29 years in front offices of spending more time with my kids. I have 2 boys, 18 and 11, so I'm making up for lost time with them. But with Fenway Sports Group, I guess technically my title is senior advisor and part owner. So I kind of advise all the different organizations and companies that we have across the portfolio. So different role with each organization. So with the Red Sox, I get to play that Bill LaJoy role for Craig Bradlow, where I had the benefit of Bill's wisdom, someone who had done the job and done it successfully. Now I get to be there for Craig whenever he has questions, help him see around corners, help him with his development in that role. And then we also own the Pittsburgh Penguins, Liverpool Football Club in the Premier League. We have a NASCAR team, Roush Fenway Racing, where I can't drive stick, so I'm not sure I'm a great help there. But we're also the lead investor in this consortium that is invested in the PGA Tour. So I'm actually doing a lot of work. I'm on this competition, this future competition committee at the PGA Tour, where we're putting in a lot of thought under the leadership of Brian Rolap, who's the new CEO
Yep.
of the PGA Tour, and Tiger Woods, who's chairing the committee, trying to reimagine the competitive and commercial model for the
Oh,
tour.
you've got to be eating that up. That's got to be right up your. You must be
Yeah.
loving that.
No, it's really interesting stuff. And my oldest is a big golfer, so I've got the golf bug myself the last couple of years, so it's good work. And then I'm also an operating partner for Arctos Partners.
Oh,
Arctos
We know that.
Partners was the
Yeah.
first mover in the space of institutional capital coming into the sports world. So they're sports only private equity company started.
we know them well here at the Wharton School. We have a partnership with Arctos. So
Yeah, that's right. So they were the first mover in that space. Actually, got the rules changed at Major League Baseball and subsequently NHL and NBA, and now just the last year or two the NFL. So they have close to 30 investments in different teams across the four major sports here in global soccer. So it's been fun. After sort of working for owners for 30 years, I recognize what a sea change this was going to be with institutional capital coming in and creating liquidity and some growth capital. And so it's been fun to advise. I definitely do not ever want to consider myself a finance guy, and I do not. But getting exposure to that world, and they're doing some real exciting work on the phone with commissioners and sports owners every day. It's been a lot of fun. So as far as the future, as my kids get older and can see myself jumping back in full time, if it's with a team, I definitely want to. I've seen the power of great ownership in sports, like what you can do to make an impact in your city, how you can align the team around certain values on and off the field. So, if I'm back helping run a team again someday, I definitely want to do it from an ownership position to sort of maximize the impact. And who knows? Like I was lucky enough to work at Major League Baseball and help with the rule change project. You started to allude to earlier of how you think it's a better world when baseball truly is the national pastime. I completely sign off on that. I agree. So anything I can ever do to help baseball in any capacity and help restore it to its place atop the pecking order, I think we're all better off. And you asked earlier about what can we do? I mean, baseball has some incredible advantages relative to the other sports. I mean, we have twice the content in a world where live content is king in the media and entertainment landscape these days. So, Rob and the powers that be in baseball are really starting to be strategic and creative in how we can use that going forward in the next collective bargaining agreement, next set of media deals to sort of like maximize engagement and lift the impact of the sport. We take place every day. It's sort of, the news cycle is so short now. We don't, unlike football and hockey, we don't wear helmets on our players. Like our players should be the biggest stars in all sports because they're very accessible. They're out there every single day. We play twice the amount of games. Baseball has unbelievable narrative arcs, watching a starting pitcher out there perform or a player through the course of the season. So, as we lean into that, you expand the fan base, you attract casual fans who might be in it more for human interest than for all the inside baseball stuff. And, it's sort of unlimited potential. And as it is, look, we draw more fans than any other sport by a 3x multiple. The second most attended sport in this country is minor league baseball. More people go to minor league games than go to the NFL or NBA or NHL. And
it's also a family game. I mean, if you go to a baseball game, you see families there. You don't see that.
Absolutely. And it's a good, the pace now of the game is back restored, as you said earlier, to this natural rhythm. You can talk to people, you can enjoy it without being completely locked in. And it's, it's a good antidote for what's happening in the rest of the country with our addiction to screens and this constant demand from different sources for our attention and the polarization that you find sort of like everywhere. Baseball is a great unifier. So I just think we have so many natural advantages as the best game there is, that over time, as we adjust to new societal norms and lean into the advantages we have, we're going to be in good shape.
Well, Theo, Adi and I would like to thank you for joining us here on Wharton Moneyball and the Wharton Podcast Network. We've been talking to Theo Epstein, a man who, I'm going to make a statement now. I assume when he's either in Boston or Chicago or possibly many other cities, will never spend money on a beer for the rest of his life.
Not true.
Well,
Not
I like
true?
what you said, though.
Do people recognize you in Boston?
No, so
You
one quick anecdote about that.
Yeah,
So
please.
we said, everyone came up to me after we won in 04, said, you'll never buy a beer in Boston again. So we had kind of a disastrous spring training in 2005 where our whole rotation got hurt and Kurt Schilling was down. He was going to start opening day. Next thing you know, we had to throw David Wells out there. Opening day, Sunday night baseball, Yankee Stadium. He gets bombed. Matt Clement, our big free agent signing, like didn't get out of the fourth inning in game 2. And by the time we got home to start our first homestand of the year, trust me, Tito and I were joking around. We were paying full freight for everything, beer, dinner, and everything else. So the honeymoon period is short in the good baseball market.
By the way, you remember, you're sitting here talking to two fans whose team has won one championship in 26 years. So if you had told us that in 2000, we would have said that's not possible. As you talked about I forget you call it the dice roll or whatever, the playoffs. If you had told Adi and I that at the end of the 2000 season, the Yankees would have one championship in 26 seasons, we would have said, how is that possible? It's not possible.
And they're the winningest team in baseball over that 26 years.
Yep.
In terms of regular season.
Well, there we go. But Theo, we'd like to thank you for joining us on Wharton Moneyball. On behalf of myself, this is Eric Bradlow. On behalf of my co-host today, Adi Wyner, this has been 1 hour of Wharton Moneyball. Some combination of myself, Adi, Cade Massey, and Shane Jensen are here every week talking sports and statistics. For our producer, Dion Simpkins, for our the big boss man, Marissa Renna, we'd like to thank you. And thank you again for Theo Epstein for this week on Wharton Moneyball.